Hi, my name is Rohail. I'm 20 years old. I'm a student, university student at McMaster University. I'm studying life science, and I hope to go into medicine. Um, I actually live in Dubai, but I go to university in Canada. Before I was diagnosed, in terms of like academics and school, everything was online because it was the pandemic. So with that regard, everything was good. But something that I was really into at the time was exercise. So I was very adamant about my gym routine and schedule. I'd go every single day to the gym. I'd walk to the gym. I'd work out for an hour, and I would walk back home. And I would also, play volleyball with my cousins in the park, or do other kind of sports with my family. Playing games, things like that. So at the time I was 19, and yeah, so I was really into a lot of sports and moving around and doing a lot of fun activities. It was late of 2021 was when my symptoms started to develop. So as I mentioned before, I would walk to the gym, and I started realizing that I wasn't able to walk anymore, because by the time I reached the gym, which was like a 20-minute walk, I was already pretty exhausted. So I started driving to the gym. Then, like a week later, or like a couple of days later, I realized that when I would be like running on the treadmill, my heart rate would go up a lot faster than I'd be used to. And so I would have to keep lowering the speed that I was running on, because my heart rate was going quite high without having to put in as much work. So I found that interesting, but I kind of thought of that as a bonus, and like, oh, I don't have to work so hard, and my heartbeat is going so high. And then I started realizing that when I would do like weightlifting exercises, things that wouldn't really tire me out typically, they would completely exhaust me. I would do a set, and I'd be like on the floor, like really like taking deep breaths, and feeling a little bit dizzy, lightheaded, and I would have like a 5-minute rest between I'd go for the next set, which usually I would wait maybe 30, max like 40 seconds before I'd move on to the next set. And then after that, I stopped going to the gym completely. And even when I would play volleyball with my cousins and my uncles, my entire family, I was, when we'd be playing, I'd get tired very quickly, and my entire family would make fun of me. They're like, "Oh, you go to the gym, but you're getting tired so quickly. Like, oh, like going to the gym is such a scam. Like you're completely like you're not even like that fit. You're like running out of breath." And I would find that very interesting. And then I started to, like, as the symptoms went on, it was actually Ramadan, which is when we fast. So I attributed a lot of my symptoms to fasting, which was, at that time, it was in like April time. And so I thought, I'm so tired. When I'd stand up, I'd get a head rush, and I would almost black out every time. Walking was super, super difficult. I realized that going from my bed to like my door, I would just be exhausted, and my heart rate was always very fast. I was becoming pale, and I never said anything, which is shocking, because my symptoms were so severe. I couldn't climb upstairs, or take literally a couple of steps without almost like passing out, and I didn't say anything. And some other symptoms I noticed were I'd have these like dots, like little reddish dots, across my feet, especially, and around my lower leg. And I had a tooth infection around my wisdom tooth, and I went to the dentist to get it checked at, and he gave me a course of antibiotics for, I think, 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, the infection wasn't going away; it just kept spreading. It felt like it was getting worse. It was kind of moving up and down. I could kind of feel the infection. So that all happened over a span of, let's say, like the entire month of March and April, and a little bit of the end of Feb, that to the point where it was beginning of May, I was always shivering. My heart rate would be really, really high, and I'd always be really tired, and I wasn't eating a lot. I lost weight. I was irritable, and I was very, very pale, especially in my eyes and my hands and my feet, which my grandmother noticed. And I never said anything at all during this whole process. So I definitely didn't think it was aplastic anemia. I mean, I'd heard of the disease, I'd read about it somewhere in some textbook or something, but that was definitely not where my mind jumped to at first. I just thought my iron was really low, and I just became, you know, anemic, like I had some sort of iron deficiency anemia or something, because my sister has low iron, and my sister and my dad and a lot of members of my family, they all have thalassemia minor. So I thought, oh, maybe I also have thalassemia minor. For some reason, it's just presenting now, like I just have these symptoms. But it came to a point where my symptoms became really bad, where I was like, okay, I think this is something a little bit worse than just having anemia, because a lot of my family members have, you know, they're just anemic, but their symptoms are never like as severe as what I was feeling. And for some reason, I don't know why, I just didn't say anything at all. You know, my family members would be like, are you okay? You always seem tired. You always like are exhausted. You're losing weight. You're quite pale. And I would just, you know, say like, oh, it's because I'm fasting, or, oh, I'm fine. You're like looking too deep into it. And it wasn't until I had the tooth infection that, you know, I told my mom and my aunt, I'm like, can you like book me an appointment with the dentist? Oh, and also I'm having all these other symptoms. And that's when my mom looked at me and she was like, what do you think this is? And I said, I think I'm probably just anemic. Like, it's not a big deal. And I think she also believed that as well. But it was obviously very important to go get it checked out. So that's when we ended up going to my family doctor, and she was like, okay, yes, you are anemic, without doing a blood test, because I hadn't done a blood test yet, but with my symptoms. And I had, she found that I had a flow murmur in my heart as well. And so she also said that this could just be like a severe form of anemia, but we had to do a blood test and figure things out. So I was convinced that it was just anemia, but it wasn't until May 9th, which was Mother's Day actually, where I went and got a blood test. That like all my levels were low in terms of my hemoglobin, my platelets, and my neutrophils and white blood cell count was low, and that's when I went to the ER, and at that point I had no idea what this could be, and I knew for sure this definitely isn't just anemia, like there's something else going on like as well at the same time. I had a very, I guess, a reaction that people wouldn't think, you know, as someone who has a diagnosis would have. I was kind of intrigued and a little bit excited, because so I want to go into medicine, and so I was thoroughly enjoying, you know, sitting in the ER and, you know, waiting for the ER doc to come in. And my mom and my dad and my aunt were like, you know, they were like more pale than me. They were so worried as to what may be going on, and I was sitting there smiling, because I was like, oh, I feel like I'm in an episode of Grey's Anatomy, like I'm a medical mystery, and I love Grey's Anatomy. So for me, I don't know, it felt super interesting that I was, you know, living this life of medicine, and so, you know, the ER doc came, and you know, they spoke to her about my symptoms, and she referred me to the hematologist, and so I got transferred to another hospital, and the whole time I was obviously a little bit worried as to what this could be, but I think a bigger part of me was a lot more intrigued as to what, you know, what's going on with me, you know, what do I, you know, what's the treatment, you know, what are the next steps, and I was like that throughout my whole journey. I was always very excited about it. I never took it very seriously. Like, I understood the severity of the disease, but I was always, you know, making jokes about it and being very lighthearted about it. And, you know, I found it very, very interesting. As soon as a doctor would say something about the disease, like, oh, okay, you know, after I had my my bone marrow biopsy to confirm the diagnosis, you know, I'd be asking the doctors, oh, okay, so what medication are you going to give me to, like, you know, put me to sleep? And I would always be researching, you know, all the medications or all the terminology that they've been saying. So I was very, I was never very worried or, you know, struck in by the diagnosis. I was more intrigued and excited about it. In the days after I was in the ER, and they figured out that something was clearly wrong, I needed to meet the hematologist, which was May 9th. That day I received blood transfusions and platelet transfusions that day as well, but turns out that I'm actually allergic to platelets. So I had a really bad reaction to my first platelet transfusion, which landed me in the ICU for 2 days. And so it was in the ICU when I woke up. I think it was the next morning or next afternoon, where the hematologist came in and he actually gave me the diagnosis, and he said that we'll have to do a bone marrow biopsy. And so I was in the hospital for 4 or 5 days, getting I think I got one bag of, or 2 bags of platelets and 5 bags of blood, because I came in with a hemoglobin of 3 and a platelet count of, I think it was 17. And so they just had to top up my levels first. And so once that was all done, I got my bone marrow biopsy, which confirmed that I had a very severe aplastic anemia. I think it was like 2% cellularity in my bone marrow. And after that, when I had my meeting with my hematologist, he said that in my case, I would have to go for a bone marrow transplant instead of another thing that other patients with the aplastic anemia do, which is the immunotherapy with eltrombopag and ATG and cyclosporin. So he said in my case that that probably won't work because of the severity, and I'd probably have to go right to transplant. And so that's when, kind of the whole family got together, and there was a lot of nerves involved, and you're thinking about where to go, and who's the donor, and all this new information. What is HLA? What is a half match? What is a full match? What is like a bone marrow transplant, or like what is bone marrow? Like there was so many questions that came up, and so with that whole process over a month, so I guess through the whole month of May, my sisters got tested. I have 2 sisters, but it turns out that they are identical matches to each other, but they are 0% match to me, the one who matters. There was no match to me, but I was really lucky that I had a lot of cousins, of which I think 4 got tested because they were old enough and were healthy enough to get tested. And so my cousins got tested, but before the results came from them, we decided to go to Johns Hopkins for my bone marrow transplant. For us, it was between either Mayo Clinic or Hopkins, because of I guess those are the 2 biggest centers for transplant. And if I did have a full match, I would have gone to Mayo, but because I had a half match, and we knew that I would only have a half match since my sisters weren't a match to me at all, that we decided to go to Hopkins because they pioneered the research for half match transplants, and they'd done a lot more statistically half match transplants than Mayo Clinic did. So as a family, we decided to head to Baltimore for my transplant, and we left on June 1st. So it was a very, very quick turnaround schedule. And so I went to Hopkins June 1st, and it took about a month until July 6th, which is when I began the transplant journey. So within that month, I was transfusion dependent, and I had all of my genetic tests and bone marrow biopsies and et cetera, all those things that needed to be done, I had to complete. July 6th, I was admitted for my surgery to get my Hickman line, central line placed into my chest. And at that point, the only symptoms I had were, the fatigue and, et cetera. And the mouth sores from the low neutrophils. And then once I started the chemo, which for aplastic anemia, it's 9 days of chemo. So I did 2 days of ATG, and then 5 days of fludarabine, and 2 days of cyclophosphamide. And the symptoms I had were, the very, very typical things that they prepared me for, which was a lot of nausea and vomiting as well. The extreme fatigue and tiredness and loss of appetite and changes to my taste buds, especially. But for me, I was lucky that my taste buds were fine with food, but when it came to water or a lot of liquids, I couldn't tolerate it. So I did not drink water for 3 months at all. I just drank, I think I could tolerate lemonade. I drank a lot of lemonade, and I hate lemonade, but for some reason my taste buds changed to like lemonade. And Sprite, lemonade, and Fanta. Those are my 3 big things that I would drink a lot, because I just couldn't tolerate water. And yeah, just the extreme tiredness, and obviously the hair fall as well. And the weight loss as well, which required me to have an NG tube, which is a tube that goes up your nose into your stomach to give nutrients. So I needed an NG tube as well, because I was losing a lot of weight. We also, for aplastic anemia, we also do 1 day of radiation, 1 day before the transplant. And a lot of people, what I've seen, they have a little bit of a, which affects you more, like chemo or the radiation. And for me, it was the radiation. I remember I was in a really bad mood because I was really like nauseous. But then during my radiation treatment, they like played music on Spotify. So I was like, I was in like a better mood. And when I left like my radiation suite and I went back to my room, I was feeling, a little bit better, but I ended up, having to go to the bathroom, and my like blood pressure dropped, and I felt very cold and pale and very clammy. And I was kind of like laying on the floor of the bathroom, and I developed a high fever and Rigers, which is like a really intense like shivering. I was like shaking the bed, and my like tonsils were like inflamed, especially the next day, because of the radiation. Yeah, those were, I guess, like my main symptoms. In terms of my like taste buds getting back to normal, I think it was like 2 to 3 months before I, especially like for the first month when I was in the hospital for 32 days. That was like my admission was for 32 days. So I wasn't drinking water at all during then. And I think it was like a month or 2 months after that. So I think for 2 to 3 months, I wasn't able to tolerate water. But towards the end, I would start training myself to like water, and my taste buds soon followed. And just that, like the fact that water like quenches your thirst, that like thirst you have, I really wanted that. So I remember during my stay in the hospital, I chugged a bunch of water, and my body just did not, it didn't work with my body. And so I ended up throwing up, and I threw up my NG tube with it as well. And so that wasn't very fun. But yeah, it took about 2 to 3 months for me to get used to, drinking water. And in terms of my energy levels, I think towards the end of my hospital stay is when I started to feel better. I could do more laps, like on the ward. I used to only be able to do like 2 laps, and I was on the pediatric ward. Even though I was 19, I chose to go to the pediatric side. There'd be like little children who were like running like laps around me, and I was like taking like a very long time to walk. But towards the end of my hospital stay, I was able to do, I think like I would go like 15 laps. So my energy did begin to increase. But transplant is a very slow, it's a very slow healing process. It wasn't until like 3 months post transplant where I could like attempt stairs again. In terms of building stamina, that takes a long time to get back. All the other things will come back in terms of your taste, or your mood, things like that, or your appetite. But stamina takes the longest. And I feel like until 6 months post transplant, which for me was January, that's only when I started to feel completely back to normal in terms of energy level, stamina, appetite, everything. But especially the stamina level is what takes the longest to build back up. For me, I was actually, at the time I was in Dubai before my diagnosis, during the pandemic, everything, because that's where my family is, that's where I grew up. And since university was online, I was in Dubai, and so I went to Baltimore. And after 3 months, they allowed me to come back to Dubai because a friend of my doctor's is a doctor here in Dubai and is a bone marrow transplant specialist. So my doctor was very comfortable with letting me go back to Dubai, and so it did take until I guess like my 6-month mark to go kind of back to normal, because I just had more energy in terms of stamina. And because of the pandemic, and the fact that I'm immunocompromised, I've just had a transplant. My levels weren't back. Your levels don't really go back to normal until your 6-month mark. So even till now, I still don't do any kind of indoor dining, cinemas, anything indoors. I don't do. I'm always wearing my mask, even around my family. But my family all had COVID, so, except for me. I didn't have a COVID, but my entire family did. So now I'm more comfortable with taking my mask off around them. And so for me, what I've been told by my doctors is, going back to normal life would only kind of happen once I've passed the 1 year post-transplant, anniversary, and I'm starting to be weaned off my immunosuppressants. because I'd be susceptible to infections and things like that. So I've been very careful. But overall, I guess now I'd be like from 6 months onwards, from January onwards, I've started to kind of resume my day-to-day habits, like hanging out with my family, going out to outdoor restaurants or going to the beach, things like that. I've started to be able to go back into water because I did develop a GVHD of the skin, and so I didn't want to do anything that would irritate my skin. So I wouldn't go in the pool or the beach. But now that that's been taken care of, I've started to do that again, and I've started going back to the gym. My uncle has a gym in his basement, so I go to that gym because it's private. And other than that, I've had no kind of episodes of fatigue or any of my previous symptoms that I had. Those are all gone. So it does take a while to go back to your normal, but I think I'm starting to enter that phase again. There's a lot. I feel like the most important thing that I found the most important, and I think is not just for the patient, but even for the patient's family members, is educate yourself. There's a lot of medical jargon that gets thrown at you with this disease, and with the treatment and everything. Like, you're going to be dealing with a lot of medical lingo, medical talk, and educating yourself and being your own advocate as a patient, in my opinion, I think is extremely important, especially if you're someone who's a bit older. Like I was 19 when I was diagnosed, so I was of legal age, and so a lot of the doctors, they said that we will come to you when you want to speak to something. Obviously, if your parents are there, will speak to them as well, but you are your own advocate. And I think that's something that's super important, to educate yourself and understand what the doctors are telling you. And if you have questions, ask them questions and be super involved in your treatment. Like, for example, with me, when the doctors would come in, I would read all my labs before they did, because they worked with my chart or Epic, so I could see my blood results as well. So when they come for their rounds, I was already like up to date with all my levels, and if my platelet count was less than 10, or was at 11, 10 or 9, I would have to get a platelet transfusion. And I would speak to my doctors and say, hey, could I get my platelet transfusion at night? I'm not a kid. I won't be like running around potentially injuring myself with a low platelet count, which is, that's dangerous. Could I get my platelet transfusion in the nighttime? Because they would give me pre-medications because I was allergic to my platelet transfusions. So they give me like Benadryl, which would make me super sleepy. And so I'd ask them, like, can I get it in the nighttime? Is that okay? Or can we postpone it to later? Or, could I get my blood transfusion tomorrow? Because even though my hemoglobin is, 8, I feel fine, and, I don't have symptoms. Or when I do have symptoms, I let you know, so we can start my transfusion. So being super involved in your own care, I think, is super important, and being educated, and also just understanding that you're the one who's affected, but so are your family members. I was really bad at that. I would lash out at them as why they weren't understanding certain things, that I would pick up on very quickly, because I have more of a scientific mind than they do, because I'm interested in these things. And I was very frustrated with them, and had a very short and quick temper, and I feel like just understanding that they're also going through something as well, as well as you are, is a super important thing as well. I was just researching, Aplastic Anemia foundations, like on Google, because I really wanted to get, number one, involved, because after my experience, I just had this passion to, I wanted to, help in research with bone marrow transplants, and, join support groups and be, a volunteer. And so I think I came across your website, and I was looking over it, and then there was a tab that said, like, become a volunteer, and I really wanted to help other people who were in my same situation, or about to be in the same predicament that I was in. And also, for personally, I did not have any kind of support group in terms of people who have also gone through transplant that I could have spoken to. And that's something that, for me, I wish I had during my transplant, because it's very easy to feel very isolated, and I did feel very isolated being on, number one, a pediatric ward where I was the oldest patient. The next oldest patient was like 6 years younger to me. So I was the only one with my disease on the floor. There were obviously other kids who were getting transplant as well, but I never really could interact with them because they were all so much younger than me. So it was very easy for me to feel very isolated, and so I wish I had you guys as a support group that I could have joined and been a part of, because it really would have during transplant. But better late than never, I guess. So that's how I came across you guys, and I really want to get involved with other people, because I know it would have made a really big difference to me. So I just wanted to do that and help out.